Welcome. Thanks for coming to this, today's final session of the London Design Biennale Forum, How Will Cities Get Us to a Greener Future? My name is Aric Chen. I'm General and Artistic Director of the Nieuwe Instituut, which is the Netherlands National Museum and Institute for Architecture, Design, and Digital Culture in Rotterdam. We also happen to be the Artistic Director as an institute for this year's London Design Biennale, and we have to thank, of course, the Biennale for having all of us here today. As some of you hopefully know, the theme that we came up with for this year's Biennale was the global game remapping collaborations. And long story short, it's based on this, based on the understanding that, as we all know, global challenges require global cooperation, but of course, that is much more easier said than done. And so at a time of, let's say, rising nationalism, hardening borders, and growing geopolitical instability, we asked, could we use the Biennale as a kind of a test case to create a sort of speculative alternative geopolitical landscape through design to explore the potentials for self-organized transnational collaboration. Now, of course, a lot of these challenges are ecological challenges, and for today's session, we're going to focus on those, but not through the lens of the nation state, as with the Biennale, but instead through the role of cities, where 60% of us will be living, it's estimated, by the year 2050. And to discuss this, we have three incredible panelists. On my right, directly to my right, is Sean Lockie, Associate Director of Arup. To his left, sorry, did I say right? Left is Elise van Middelem, the founder and CEO of SUGi, and you'll hear more about that in a moment. And then last but not least, Anna Yang, who is the executive director of the Chatham House Sustainability Accelerator. So we're just going to start with, I think, each of them telling a little bit more about themselves and what they do. After that, we'll try to kind of piece it all together into a bit of a conversation with some time left at the end, we hope, for questions. So on that note, I'd like to turn things over to Sean.
Thank you. I'm going to just jump up the leg tab. It's okay?
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I'm going to just try and tell us a story of some of the work that we do and some of the work that I've been personally involved in that city context. And I think the thing that I sort of wanted to sort of bring out, I mean, this is an ecosystem here on this picture, on this slide, that more of a UK ecosystem. But whenever cities get together and they're working through a systemic goal, or we're trying to sort of deal with some of these these big challenging problems and challenges, it's going to be an ecosystem that comes together to do that. And I think Arup for quite some time has realized that we don't have all those solutions, and we're very aware of what an ecosystem brings and what that collaboration brings to a particular challenge. And this is, it's a lot more sort of complex than this, but if you start to think systemically, an old business model, an old approach would be the one there shown on the left, where your business has suppliers, employees, and customers. We've recognized, and many others have as well. I was talking earlier about the Bauhaus movement in the EU, Net Zero Cities, UNDP, other sort of city-related organizations that we work with are moving much more to this sort of systemic approach, where your business or your city or the thing that you're involved in is connected to suppliers, customers, competitors, industry groups, but also learning and pulling out more from what academia is able to bring, what NGOs are able to bring as well, and what disruptors are able to bring from the startup community. And it wasn't so long ago that Netflix was a startup, and look at the disruption it had on home entertainment. So if you take a city space, there are a number of layers to these sorts of interventions. And they require, as I showed earlier, governance, academia, think tanks, finance, enterprise, people and citizens to come together, but in new combinations that bring about new markets, enhanced citizen participation through new forms of stakeholder engagement, whether those be citizen assemblies, participatory budgeting, citizen juries, where citizens are involved much more in the process of shaping those sorts of outcomes. New financial products. Cities often have assets and land and covenants and powers. How are they able to leverage those powers? Looking at emerging technologies, new skills and education, and also cities, remember, they're places where businesses concentrate, but also if you're trying to bring about change, you have proximity benefits there, and you have potential for economies of scale as well. And in some cases, cities are able to bring about new policy and regulatory frameworks as well. And if you start to think about this with an innovation lens, you have, the city's, frame of today, the Horizon 1. The frame of today is, clearing the streets, reducing the crime rates, thinking about, health and well-being, air quality, smog, those sorts of things. Horizon 2 is thinking about sort of 4 to 5 years out, and what are some adjacent industries that you can learn from. But then Horizon 3 is that real sort of moonshot. You may hear this being used, the term mission innovation being used a lot more now. And that's thinking very much that sort of Horizon 3, 12 to 15, 20 years out. And systems change is part of that. So I've shown pieces of it. And this is it's quite a complex slide, but what this shows is you sometimes might see this as an iceberg. There's the things that you see at the top, the tip of the iceberg. But when you actually look down in through that, there's a lot of other things that are unseen. So we're showing this in a landscape sort of way. So at the landscape level, what are the things that you can see? Then at the socio-technical regime, so within that, the new bright things that are occurring, the new policies, the new ways of innovating, but then those technological niches, which are the startups that we'll have one of speak to us later about nature, because these are the future ideas that ideally we want to be able to harness there and scale and look for those sort of breakthroughs. And we need that different relationship between patient capital and the kind of feedback that we're able to receive. And so as a framework here, let's start thinking, there are some thematic pieces that occur across the top. Resilience and adaptation, nature and regeneration, materials and the transition around that, health and well-being, and a just transition, and climate and the climate challenge and transition. Those are the transitions that we often sort of talk about, but they can get delivered through different forms of delivery, and they can be delivered at a community level, at a district level, at a city level, nation level, regional level as well. And they require collaborative partners, as I've shown, in order for those things to happen. I'm going to skip through that last one, and just so that in many of the, particularly in Europe, older settlements, there's so much of the carbon emissions come from the existing buildings, and much of the retrofit question is about building by building. But what happens if we're able to look at whole streets, if we're able to look at whole districts? The opportunity that starts to occur is we're able to look at the public realm, the spaces between the buildings. We're able to achieve economies of scale. We're able to tap into more efficient and bigger forms of energy and power distribution, we're able to think about regeneration of that place, looking at public realm, create consistent forms of business through that process. The kind of numbers that we're talking about at retrofitted scale are just so enormous that we run the risk of a boom bust type sort of cycle. So what we need from this retrofitted scale type program is consistent release and a consistent, steady local economy creation of green jobs through that. And moving from individual building sort of approaches into a more systemic approach where we're considering things like policy, people and finance, and single buildings into neighborhoods. And that's where we'll get the jobs to happen, the health and well-being and the regeneration occurring at scale. But putting people and communities at the center of that whole that whole piece. If they can see clearly what's in it from them, then you get the community on board. They're the ones voting for the municipalities and mayors. They're the ones that are voting for the political systems within the regions and the nations that they sit within. And so I just want to tell two or three stories, quick ones, around some of our sort of work. This one's at the individual level. So Lambeth had, London Borough of Lambeth, one of the most deprived boroughs in the UK, had this aim to create a climate action plan. And there were the usual sort of areas of adaptation, buildings, transport, waste, and biodiversity as the sort of thematic areas that occurred. But what we found when working within this program, within this project, is there was a citizen assembly that was created that had very, very good participation, but there were missing groups within that. And the missing group that was very obviously missing were young people of colour from economically deprived backgrounds. So what we did, we partnered with We Rise, an organisation that was in the borough, to try and create these pathways of what a green future would be. And they picked circular fashion, building retrofit, and sustainable food. And so through that, we were able to give that cohort group a voice in the climate action plan and build in their aspirations within that. And then in Milan, I want to just pick out something, so this program called Reinventing Cities, which C40 developed. And the idea behind Reinventing Cities was the city provides the site, and on that site, the innovation occurs. And this is one of them in Esto in Milan. And you can see here the partners that were involved in the development of this project, which is all about social housing. And you can see the types of uses there. I mean, there's a cyclocross space. There's private vegetable gardens. There's aquaponics. There's a community food hub. There's an orchard. There's etc. But the innovation for me that I wanted to just share with you is before this project was actually built, the occupiers were brought together 2 years before even the construction actually started in order to build an ecosystem that trusted each other and then would enable a sharing economy. And here you can see the bar on the left is the business as usual and how we took out carbon through that process, through construction, bioremediation, mobility, district heating, and the creation of a zero carbon fund for the city as well. And then that idea of reinventing cities from individual plot sites then became a bigger idea and one around districts. And they're green and thrive, so there's a bit of a timeline of some of the things that we've done with C40, but this is the guide here, the green and thriving neighborhoods. And what this green and thriving neighborhoods is, it takes that same systemic approach that I mentioned around a complete neighborhood, people-centered mobility, connected place, clean construction, green buildings, and energy sustainable lifestyles, etc. And it puts that framework out as a way that cities can use to catalyze that change at a district level. And there are now 35 of these that are occurring globally, and they're learning from each other in a learning network as well. All open source, all free to download, free to anyone, for anyone to use. And then I just wanted to close with this, really, is that this is Arup's footprint in London. I think there are over 500 projects in London that we're actively involved in. And this could be Milan, it could be Madrid, it could be Copenhagen, Berlin, etc. How do we as Arup work with the city makers to extract the knowledge out of this portfolio and to provide it back in as evidence bases, as input into new policy, as rapidly learning insights, etc. Because within the room in many of these places, there's knowledge in each of those stars that we could potentially collectively pass through to the city administration. So that would be my challenge for cities, is getting those learning networks to work well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. As you can tell, Sean is a bit of an overachiever. And the next presentations, I think, will be a little bit shorter. But thanks so much for that, Sean. Those are really great examples. And it's great that you've shown us already the importance of collaboration. But I think maybe one thing that we haven't touched on quite so much yet is collaborating with nature, which Elise will speak more about in a second.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Sean, you put the bar high. So, as Sean mentioned, we're going to zoom in now and look at nature. SUGi delivers nature-based solutions in cities. So we create pocket forests that build biodiversity, climate resilience, and well-being within communities. SUGi, was also a bit of a personal journey. It really started based on this idea, like, why do we have to keep planting so far away? Why can't we bring the forest closer? Our cities were once built upon a forest. They were once forests, many of them. And so I think we all felt it during the pandemic. We had to find a piece of green and some respite. And so this idea with SUGi is that really born just a bit over 4 years ago. And I have the thing. There we go. So today we're a global network of forest makers. We've got about 160 pocket forests planted around the world. And this I can say, is really an ecosystem that started with 2 forest makers. And over the past 4 years now, we're 26. And the main point with this and with SUGi really is that idea, again, of biodiversity building, ecosystem restoration, but also reconnecting to nature. So when we create our pockets of forest in cities, we always have the community involved. Is that workforces, meaning staff from a company, or is that schools? We always try and have everyone involved, because in the end, it is the people in the community that lives close to the forest that will also interact with it. And over the past years now, we've had an incredible amount of feedback around that. But I'll get into that. So we're in London here. In London, we have 4 pockets planted in central London, and we have 9 of them in Barking and Dagenham. We look at it that way. Right now, to work with cities, as you also heard from John, it's really complex. And so the way that we looked at it was always to find that kind of minimal space that can have maximum diversity. As you can see here also in the pictures, these are maybe 1 or 2, sometimes 3 years old of pocket forest. And the idea is that we plant very densely. So maybe to go deeper into that, the method of planting that we adopt is called the Miyawaki method. It's a method that was pioneered by a Japanese botanist about 40 years ago. And Dr. Akira Miyawaki's idea was really to bring back what was once there, to really restore our native forests. Now, you can say, okay, there's small spaces, how can this work? Well, on a square meter, we plant about 3 trees, and we plant them in 4 layers, shrub, subto tree, and canopy. So you really, if you walk into an ancient forest, it's never just one row of trees, right? It's very dense, it's multi-layered, there's a whole sensory aspect to it. There's an ancestral feeling to it. When we plant with the people, and when we never plant trees, we create forests. We start with the soil, we bring back the natural ingredients back. I mean, we have to kickstart our soils. You can see this was gravel. This like underused space between plane trees on Pond Street. And that's 230 square meters. We planted about 700 trees, 77 species. And the idea when you go there today, it's that idea of mimicking British woodland. So there's a lot of wildflowers on the outside, and then you create of course we can't go into canopy here because you still have the plane trees. But then here, there's a perfect example in Barking and Dagenham, and we've done 9 pocket forests there. This is the largest Miyawaki forest in Europe and in the UK. It's 1 hectare, it's 30,000 trees. And it's that idea of green deserts. You've all seen it this summer. The parks were just like scorched. That grass was so hot. And so here with Barking and Dagenham, it's really been this incredible journey of rewilding. And it's also one of the most polluted neighborhoods. It gets really warm. Temperature differences can be 20 degrees in and out of a forest. And then they also act as sponges. So whereas trees that were traditionally planted during that very hot summer, they died, or pocket forests, we have a 95% survival rate on them. So you see, and then that's a really great example is in South Bank. We just did that a month ago. An example of deep paving and rewilding. So you've got this brutalist architecture. It's a very small, tiny pocket forest, but think about it that way. It's creating pollinator pathways within the city because bees can travel up to 2-3 kilometers. And so if we can accommodate that with really minimal spaces, we can already have a success story. So some examples around the world. Karachi, Pakistan, this was an urban park, but really, could you call it a park? It was just a sand. And so we transformed that park in 3 years, just really by planting the Miyawaki method. And then Chile, this is a parking lot. And I remember talking to Magdalena in Chile, and she said, you know, Elise, the soil dreams of being a forest. Mm-hmm. And so it's that idea of, taking this underused space and making just this kind of incredible sensory experience in it. And then the other example is in Beirut, and this is where it started 4 years ago, actually, exactly 4 years ago. We reclaimed public space. And so we planted a pocket forest there, and most of them, from 2 to 3 years onwards, these forests are self-sustaining. So again, we've done now about 160 around the world, but the thing that is incredibly important to us is youth and the next generation. So we've got 87 planted within schools, about 40,000 children impacted. In India, we had a program where we did 50 schools, 50 forests, and that was in Aurangabad. And when you look at these today, I mean, the children, they use them, we call them outdoor classrooms because they go in there, they take their classes, they learn from the forest. They can actually also see restoration at first hand. It's one thing to clear a forest. It's another thing to actually see an ecosystem restore itself. It takes time. And today, we can also see the children, how they celebrate the forest. 1 year anniversary, they will make a cow patty, you know, and we get pictures. So I think for us, it was really important, that idea of the forest doesn't have to be far away. It can be right where we live and work. We can absolutely reintegrate that concept of having that forest within our ecosystem. And I think when we look at now all these forests planted, and the big takeaway for me was that idea of that they've become an integral part of the lives. And we get so much feedback around, you know, Is it birds? Is it like, we've got photographers that go out there and send us the pictures from the return of wildlife. Of course, we won't have big mammals, but everything counts today, because today everything is concrete on concrete. And if we can bring back those small pockets, whatever small they are, we're not going to be talking about carbon capture here, but we're going to be talking about respite and lifestyle, and we're going to be talking about heat islands. And also, I mean, look, recently, how many headlines there were of rain that fell, as much rain as there was not in 6 months. They act as sponges, so they have all the benefits of an ecosystem. And yeah, so we want to keep planting, and that's us. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Elise. So we've seen the importance of both human and non-human systems right now, but how we deal with systems of any kind depends on systems of systems, which I think takes us to the policy discussion, which Anna will talk about now.
Right,
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Anna Yang. I'm the Executive Director of Chatham House Sustainability Accelerator. I'll just do a very quick, so Aric asked me to talk about who I am, but actually I'm here sort of in a way representing Chatham House. So we're an independent policy research think tank founded in 1920. So we're now 103 years old. And we were actually founded after the First World War, during the Paris Peace Negotiation Agreement. And I think there's something quite poignant when we turn 100 years during the pandemic about what is the role of a think tank looking forward, and then how can we drive, well, how can we be the home of conversations and thinking that can drive to a different future, to the one that we, are living. And so our objective is to build a sustainably just, prosperous, and secure world. And the Accelerator was actually launched during the centenary, so looking into the next 100 years. And we have 3 objectives: to mainstream and accelerate sustainability. The other is to bring future into the present and capture people's imagination. And the third one is expand the stakeholders that interact with Chatham House. And so if I was to introduce myself, I am a change maker dressed up as a researcher working at Chatham House. My background actually is on forest protection, advocacy, campaigns. I'm Brazilian, so I did many, many years of campaigning, forest stuff. So when you are talking about urban forms and then also about forest, I have seen when you abandon a city in the Brazilian Amazon, the forest take over. So if you Google Ford de Langia, so Henry Ford, actually in the 50s, he had this dream of create an industry of rubber tires. And so he basically transported American small city into the middle of forest. And if you walk in there now, the city's mostly abandoned. So you can see forest taking over the city. It's amazing. It's kind of scary, but also it's very poetic. So what I'm saying is actually, if we think about the future, we should have a more symbiotic relationship with forest. So just in terms of thinking through, cities, like what are the pressures that we face? And depending on which geographies that we're looking at, climate change is a common issue. Obviously, resource management in Europe, in Asia is water, mobility, urban planning. Sub-Saharan Africa has also safety and security issues. I mean, city as an urban form is under a lot of pressure all the time. And if we think of it as a form of center of consumption, it's also a center of production. So, as Aric said, 68% of urbanized population by 2050, all 80% of global energy use come from urban areas. Wait, I should read here, I have this. And materials consumed, they are just projected to grow. And that means that in terms of greenhouse gas emission, it is 70% of greenhouse gas emission in urban areas. But also, this is where ideas are generated because we cluster them, we bring people together. This is where money flows, right? The wealthiest 100 cities generate around 38% of global GDP in 2007. And I think also what we need to think about is city as nexus of power, right? So Chatham House traditionally work with nation state. And I personally, working at Chatham House, I actually think that there are other nexus of power that we should engage with, because change and transformation need to happen everywhere. And I actually think that if you look at, what in terms of level of ambition and commitment that multiple cities have committed during Paris and before Paris and after Paris through C40, Global Compact of Mayors and all of that, there's a lot more action happening, and it's a lot more connected to the voters in a way, because they have to respond. And I wanted something for us to also think about is that, our physical built environment reflects the broader system choices, right? As Sean was saying, we are a part of a broader ecosystem, and we're part of like multiple systems that things together. And this is from a Stuart Brand, and how we think about pace of how change happens and how they're layered, right? So in a way, city is a physical manifestation of different layers, like how fast fashion changes, how fast commerce, and then they slow, and ultimately it is culture and nature that will stay pretty static. And so when we think about change, we need to be able to think about through these different layers and how they interact with each other and how these different systems operate. And that helps me sometimes, like when we're having conversation with city mayors, or when we're having, what I'm trying to say actually everybody matters in terms of when we live in cities, our aspiration, our demand choices manifest into those changes that can happen. And actually this slide, when Sean was talking about horizon, the layers, the material, if we had sort of compared our notes, we're thinking on the same level, right? When we think about cities, it is sort of the multiple use of cities. It's not, and I do think we had a partnership with the London Design Biennale when COVID just hit. And then we were talking about design in a time of crisis. And there were conversations that were had about how do we reclaim the public spaces? How do we re-engage with city as an urban form? And people saying that, I can hear the birds. I didn't know that there was a bell. There was a church nearby that I stopped hearing it. And I do think that we shouldn't miss that, remembering that relationship to continue carrying that on. And so it is the multiple time horizon, it is the multiple use of urban form. Cities should deliver the multiple values that we care about. So it is about environmental issues, it is about also the social issues, and it also needs to be able to deliver the, resilience, adaptation, greenhouse gas emission, and all that good stuff that really matters. And I think as we were sort of doing the research and the thinking, there are almost three sequence that we think about in terms of urban form. The longest time horizon in terms of lock-in is when you're designing the city, right? So when you're designing the city, if you design it in a more circular manner that has more green space, and you reduce the building stock, that means that you're actually reducing the material demand when you're building those building stocks. So that's the first long-term layer. The second layer, which is within that, which is like in the building stock, then think about the low carbon material, then other kind of sustainable material that you're using. And then the third one is already in the built places, as Sean was talking about. And then we think about what we call operational carbon, which is like, how do you do retrofit? How do you do better energy efficiency? So those are the layers of lock-in that we need to think about. In Europe, most of the building stocks are there. So it's a different dynamic to some of the places in Africa and Southeast Asia, especially China, that you have new cities being coming up every day. The design, the urban planning stage is, where you lock in the emission and where you lock in the choices that we make. And what is common is the material, the discussion. It is the data. How does the data kind of informs decision and accountability? What kind of skill that we need, the culture, and ultimately is the finance. So what I would like us to think about of cities is as a new form of accountability, but also as a new form of change making, right? And one final slide actually is when Aric was asking us to think about sustainability and regenerative. And regenerative is something that we met last year, and it really captures my imagination. And I do think that it captures a lot of people's imagination. But what does it mean, right? And we're definitely not regenerative today. We're barely sustainable as a society. And so I think the difference between sustainable is to sustain, is to keep as is. Regenerative is to add back, like what SUGi's doing, is to regenerate, is to bring life. And there are principles behind it, which really matters. It's like we have to completely think about different worldviews in which human and nature are fundamentally connected. And we are independent and we're in constant flux. So it's not static. I think the other principle is co-create and co-evolve. So it is human development with nature. It is respecting nature. I think that's something that, we tend to want to make nature work for us instead of respect nature for what it is, and then we work with nature. And be responsive to local conditions, and it is decentralized and it's highly collaborative. And I grabbed some of the key words that really sort of defines what a regenerative future or characteristics of a regenerative future would look like. It is open source, it fosters resilience, it is life supporting, it's dynamic, it's diverse, it's networked, it's system focused, long term, and mutualism, right? It needs to bring all the benefits from everyone. It's really hard because our business models are not set up like that. Our government are not set up for cooperation. And so when we host conversations at Chatham House, like how do we deliver climate change, right? COP is happening every year. We have a conference of the party, when countries come together and commit or assess how they're doing in terms of their commitment. And we all say collaboration, but what do we mean by collaboration? How do we actually step into a place of collaboration where we don't actually know what the solution is, but have that trust and humility to come together? So I just want to leave that for us to think about, like, how do we move from sustainable to regenerative, and what are the principles that we have to hold ourselves to? And it's hard, but that's the only way. So I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Anna. That was perfect. Let's pick up some of these points that you bring up, and maybe the first one is talking about the difference between sustainability and regeneration. As you said, sustainability is a word that we still use, but the implication is that we are maintaining things or minimizing damage as much as we can, whereas one can argue we've done so much damage already that simply minimizing further damage just sustains us on a trajectory that's going off the cliff, right? And in fact, maybe we should be thinking more in regenerative terms about sort of healing the planet. And in the context of cities, going back to your slide about cities as being both the kind of, let's say, emblematic of both the problem and the quote-unquote solution, can we think of cities not just as sites of sustainability, but of sites of regeneration? And maybe Sean, it'd be good to hear your thoughts on that to start with.
Yeah, I think I'd like to just sort of pick out pockets, really. Projects like the High Line, for example. There's a piece of aged infrastructure that's sat abandoned for decades. And then, a municipality, a community, a funder, the planets align for something to happen there. And we talk a lot about, the New York High Line and Camden's having its own sort of version. But we don't talk about the business model. And when you look at the value uplift from footfall, from increased kind of customer sort of journey, the nature uplift from having that on your front doors as opposed to a piece of abandoned infrastructure is all worth something. And Chongqing is another example in Korea. in Seoul, where it was a 6-lane highway, that highway was in a state of disrepair. Underneath it was a stream. The municipality looked at the maintenance costs of, repairing that 6-lane highway, and it decided, no, we're going to do something very different. And then as a result, we have a stream, and we have, nature, and we have, a very different sort of effect. But the adjoining properties have benefited from that. And as has the brand of Seoul, as has. So we need to figure out ways to be able to kind of build business models that enable that regenerative mission to actually happen. And that stuff is a bit boring and a bit, under the surface, but my gosh, is it fundamental for being able to scale these sorts of one-off pieces of innovation to something much larger across the city and connected, regionally and internationally as well.
I mean, maybe it'd be good in a moment to ask Anna like what some of these business models for regeneration could look like. But in the meantime, I mean, at least it would be great to sort of hear your thoughts on like, if the extent to which nature within the cities, whether it should be seen as another exploitable asset or how do you try to frame the insertion of these pocket forests in the different communities that you work with, and what sorts of, I mean, it seems like such a simple, obvious thing, right? But of course, things are always more complicated than you think they might be. But what sorts of even resistance do you see, and how do you get, and how do you overcome that?
It's a good question, because if you look at it, for example, today we can show for it, right? We can say, well, look, here's an example in London, and here's an example in Pakistan, and people can imagine. But when you start from scratch and you say we're going to create dense pockets of forest that we will leave untouched, that's not so easy, because I mean, cities today still, if you think about, there's lots of conversation going around urban forest, but that is still grass and trees. That's not a forest ecosystem. That is not that typical forest soil that is regenerating itself. And so I think it is not an easy conversation. It's step by step, but it takes these visionary partners, such as, for example, Barking and Dagenham, that said like, yeah, no, but we want to rewild. We really want to bring back that biodiversity and that possibility for to hear the bird song, to create places where they can nest, create density, and also sound barriers. There's multifaceted, aspects of it. But I think that word regeneration is challenging in cities. I mean, even if you take a step back and I look at it also from a nature point of view, now a big topic is regenerative agriculture. I mean, that means leaving the soil untouched. Do no harm, do not pull things out, do not release carbon, but how do you play that in a city? Because everything is at the citizens' disposition also. Like, so how can you create that in a way? Respect. It's such a big word also. Like, I mean, even in bringing these pocket forests in cities, we're amazed that people understand that relationship with it, but not always. I mean, there's education that needs to come with it, and I think that's what I see with what we do, is that's why planting in schools is so phenomenal, because it comes with the kids, it goes to the parents, they talk about it in the neighborhood, they come and look at the forest, and they learn from it. But respect is.
Can I just add something to it? Because I think we find ourselves with these sort of lenses and silos, and so I remember being in Milan, and the Sala, the mayor, had this great idea of 3 million trees.
Yeah.
And we were asked to work out the sequestration benefit, the carbon benefit of those 3 million trees. And it was less than 0.1% of the overall emissions of Milan. So if that was the only evaluation criteria, decarbonisation, that would have killed it. But of course, there's all the shading effects, nature, the biodiversity corridors, and the value uplift. You know, is something that I'm really obsessed with because that links back to the business model point again.
True.
Yeah.
Good point. But I think today they don't come. I mean, to your point, Aric, and also Sean, it's like people wouldn't come to us for say, okay, we want to offset carbon. Can we plant pocket forests? No, because that's about scale. It's really that idea of well-being and biodiversity, even at small scale.
So Anna, you've had a few minutes now to solve the world's problems.
I mean, sort of the business models around regenerative. So those principles I picked up from a paper by De Luca, 2010, about companies fit for purpose for the future, and those principles actually. So I think that the thing is, I mean, how do I talk about this without criticizing the capitalism?
You wouldn't be the only
But
one.
also, no. But I also want to be realistic, right? Because I think there are different ways that you can activate change. You can do revolution, which is pull everything down and then rebuild in the middle of chaos. And you know, I work at Chatham House. We look at Arup Spring, 2010. I'm not sure a lot was rebuilt, right? Yeah. And that revolution was, it gave so much energy, but like what happened? But I also don't believe in like incremental change or not enough. And then so for me, it's like, is there something in the middle which is reform from within, which is where, this is why I work at Chatham House. It's establishment, I reform from within, and anyway. Different people have different theories about how change happens. And so I feel that it's easy for us to like bash capitalism, but we're all part of a capitalism. This is how we make money. I mean, you know, get earning, pay for bills and all of that. But I think there is something about aspirational, this is why I call regenerative future. It's not here yet, but that's something that can capture our imagination, which is what Sean was talking about, the Horizon 3. Like if this is where we want to be, what is it that we need to do in Horizon 2 that will enable us to get to there? And I think there's some pretty fundamental things that we have to rethink, right? Which is ownership of companies. And we were talking about Arup. Is that public information?
Yeah.
Arup is owned by employees. I think that's incredible because that means that actually companies can be focused on long term, on things that the employees care about, and not only what the investors care about, which is, you know, you have to pay back the debt in the short term. Who gets the benefit? How do you do the benefit sharing? Like, what is the role of a company or in the community that it has a inserted in? Is that the right way to say it? And you know, power sharing, right? Who has the power? What is the legitimacy of power? So there's so many fundamental questions about power, ownership, benefit sharing that if we want to think about a regenerative businesses, we need to be able to tackle those. I think another example that really captures my imagination is Patagonia, right? Patagonia, right? The fact, I mean, whether it's marketing or not, but it works with me. And that they say we're a company owned by the planet. And then what we want to do is to make sure that we are delivering to the planet. And I think that is the question that many, you know, a couple of years ago, people were talking about companies with purpose. Right? What is the purpose of a company? And is it obviously to generate services and goods? But I think it must be more than that. But then there is a real tension between the ownership and the benefit sharing aspect. So I don't have the answer for what I have more questions, but there is something aspirational that we can think about in terms of if we're moving to regenerative future, what kind of businesses and even governance models that we need to think about that will take us there.
Yeah, I mean I think what one keeps hearing at these sorts of talks and conferences is that, you know, we need to do things we need to do and do things more radically. Wait, we need to think more radically and change things in radical ways. But of course, again, it's always much easier said than done, and there's always this question of is what we're doing radical enough, and the answer is no. But there are these examples that the three of you have been referring to of let's say test cases or where people are trying new things, and maybe I could ask all of you, if you could, what's the sort of radical idea for the city that you would love to do, but have not tried out yet?
Well, outcome, not process. There's so much new jargon, and I was guilty of it on my sort of presentation as well. Results, I think. But radical, I mean, there are a couple of things that I do like the sound of. I like the way Bologna has created individual contracts with individual members of the community. It all started with a park bench which was not being maintained, and the community that were affected by it said, "I want to paint that bench," and then the municipality said, "Well, health and safety," and so through a dialogue, they managed to have a contract between that individual and the municipality. They have 11,000 of these contracts. So they found a way around, and now, I mean, even to the extent where, I mean, there's a circular food idea. It's actually happening. The street markets at the end of the day, 5, 6 o'clock, there's a lot of food left over that's going to perish. This group pick it up. They then take it to a couple of high-end restaurants that are focused on circular food. And then it's served, at all levels within the community. So I think they're those sorts of things that resonate. And then at the other end, what is happening for me that's really exciting at the other end is space observation. I mean, this is massively game-changing. We want KPIs to, your forest idea, the ability to observe a city before and after is, I mean, it's just phenomenal how much this is changing. So if the city wants to be able to say how much green space, how much, tarmac atom, how much, you can get a lot of that now from space. So that would be the two, little and big.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and to tie in, dream scenario, Aric, to actually tie into that, Sean, we haven't even spoken about that, but in the US, then you speak a lot about, red light, the red zoning. This really the neighborhoods that have no tree cover at all. And dream scenario would be for us to have no negotiation with multiple stakeholders and just one city that says take this on as a case and just create corridors through this whole area. I mean, I think today if we look at planting in cities that are more complex, even in LA, you would think there's so much space. It took us 18 months to secure a school. I mean, why is it so complex? And so that would be for me dream scenario. It's still that whole long line of getting to actually people allowing you to plant. It's just open doors. Please plant. That would be great.
And your dream world.
Oh my God.
Non-capitalist.
So what is this radical? I actually think that I don't actually have the answer, but I have what I want, what I would like, since I want a pony with wings and whose glitter, is I do think that we need to really think about governance model. Because right now, the political systems that we have do not serve us, right? It serves anyway. I don't have to repeat.
Yeah.
So I actually think that if we can really reform the political system that we have that our representative actually represent what is it that we need, I think that's where the real game changer is gonna happen. What kind of political system? I don't know. Probably not anarchy or monarchy or whatever. I don't think we have figured out as a society, and we're stuck with something, right? But where we're stuck is we're even unable to challenge what we have today. And I think that's a problem. Yeah.
Well, I think we have some time for some questions. Yes. Yeah, thank you. The gentleman in the fourth row.
So we've been working in the field of sustainable cities for about 15 years, specifically focusing on urban ecotourism, urban wellness, urban organic agriculture, urban biodiversity, more recently wellness real estate, and working with organizations like ICLI, I don't know if you know, an international network of sustainable cities, and Cityslow, which is all about slow cities. All of the initiatives are focused on better quality of life for the people living in the city, in urban habitats. So I guess my question is, shouldn't we, instead of be using the word cities, it's more about urban habitats, not just cities, it's an urban habitat. And it's not about just a greener future, it's about a better quality of life future in an urban habitat. One of the things we've done is create from urban wellness maps for the city of Cape Town, for Vancouver. Toronto became the world's first city to create an urban ecotourism map of the city. But I mean, what's happening as well, for example, in London, they've made it mandatory for all new buildings to have green roofing. And green roofing is one way of addressing climate change and one way of addressing urban biodiversity. So there's a lot happening, and London's also part of the London National Park City, which is another initiative. So there's a lot happening globally, which goes way beyond, I think, what we've been hearing today. So I guess the question is, first of all, from an Arup's perspective, shouldn't cities, from the planning perspective, start talking about, okay, how can we improve or enhance wellness real estate into building and design standards of the city, as an example?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we don't always, get it spot on. There's a lag, isn't there, between what's happening real time and where standards are. Probably a 10-year lag. By the time something's gone through the evidence base, the consultation, the various rounds, and then it's finally embedded. So I think you've pointed out that there's exactly that lag piece. I think you've also pointed out that there's the city, the mega city, but there's also the interland and the smaller, the 50 to 100,000 person conglomeration space is they're really struggling to retain people, to retain knowledge. To the drift to the bigger cities is very significant. Their transport's impacted. The level of investment is falling. So I think, as you said, reframing it to an urban habitat and not to a city type term is a great steer.
And instead of focusing on the neighborhood, there's a concept called the 15-minute city. Shouldn't a greater emphasis be placed on that versus focusing on just one specific neighborhood as a starting point? In other words, the entire starting point should be the entire city, not just a specific neighborhood.
Well, green and thriving neighborhoods is all about 15 minutes.
But the 15-minute city relates to the entire city, not just a neighborhood. So shouldn't we all be talking about how all cities should be looking about not how to bring regenerative or sustainable, whatever principles into a neighborhood or starting in a neighborhood, but bringing their principles of the 15-minute city into the entire city for the people living there? And this, I guess that question relates to everybody on the panel.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions? There and then
I think it got picked up again then by Sean. You know, standards take 5 years, 10 years, lots and lots of iterations. Everything takes time, and the backdrop to that is very risk averse. So in the these horizons, don't we need much more disruptors now? Actually, not in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, but we need some significant disruptors now. Because I mean not at demonstrator scale, but things that can disrupt whole systems. Because pretty much everything that has the word public in front of it isn't controlled by the public in the interest of the public a lot of the time, isn't kind of generally managed or monetized or part of a business model that feeds back into the public.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's labs, living labs. There's rapid learning networks. I think we both work for Arup, and seeing all those red dots on a place like London. When I saw that for the first time a week ago, I looked at that and went, the combined knowledge of all those red dots isn't really even known within Arup. But if we could collectively combine that and share that with the municipality and the city sort of decision makers and the disruptors, that there's a lot of impact in that collection. So I think we'll see disruption, and that level of disruption is often it's below the surface, and then it bubbles up all of a sudden. It's very difficult to find some of that early piece or some of those early pieces of disruption until they really present you.
Anna, what do you think? Do you see revolution coming?
Reform. Well, I'm an optimist. Like working at climate change, you have to be an optimist. Otherwise, right? Anyway, otherwise I can go home and live it by the beach. But I think I'm a disruptor as well. This is why. Like the thing about change and disruption is it's really hard, because you are actually swimming against the tide most of the time until the tide changes. But it's almost like you need enough of disruption, and then you almost need like containers to capture those disruptors so that you can then give a bit of a boost. And I think I do think that in the startup community, like in the traditional startup, they have somehow cracked that, although the business model behind it is not great, because it's like winners take all and that's all. But I think there's something about having containers for disruptors come together to learn with each other and then to mentor, because they feel that once you have broken through, you have to pay back into your disruption system. I think that's a really incredible, it's like an incredible concept. But we don't have that for other kind of disruption other than like this pure traditional venture capital model. And so in a way, disruptions are everywhere. It's just like, how do we catch them, nurture them so that they don't die before they pass the valley of death, right? Anyway. And just on the question about 15-minute city, yes, I absolutely agree. I think the question is, and I'm not a urban planner or city designer. I came at the the whole city discussion as a researcher perspective. And apparently it's not a new concept. It's an old concept that we are reshuffling. And I think, when I also looked into city, there's so many definitions of what is a city. And the closest to what I find it comprehensible is it's a complex network. And if people are interested in complexity, Santa Fe Institute has some really good discussions about city as a complex network and how do you study them as a complex network instead of like one unit, right? It's a form of relationship, capital flow and resource flow, and we should probably analyze them from that perspective than like siloed units. Sorry.
No, but it's just related to your point. Disrupting, it's a big word. It's every day you swim against the tide. But I think the biggest thing is actually to start something and then do it to the fullest. But you're never going to do or solve a problem alone. This is the thing about collaboration, Biennale, but I also see that, like, what does it mean 160 pocket forest, right? Like, I would love to have 1,000 tomorrow. But that doesn't work like that. I think many people need to do many things all at once, and then there will be change. Because it's just too easy to talk about it, like we need to all do.
Can I pick up a point on collaboration? Because I think that's, if you think about the theme, is the big collaboration. And also what I was saying is it is hard collaboration because you have to go beyond what you were supposed to do by yourself and then step into the place and invite someone else to step into the place for collaboration. And I think, as I was saying, this is the only way. But one thing I wanted to do actually is to plug the game. So Chatham House actually has installation in which room? Somewhere.
In Somerset House.
Somerset House. Oh yeah, sorry, we're not in Somerset House. In Somerset House at London Design Biennale, there is a collaboration game. And so you can be, for 75 minutes, city mayors and city officials. And then you're going to go through various scenarios of shocks and resource planning, resource allocation. And I think that is actually a way for us to think about how difficult it is to do collaboration, but also why it is necessary. Sorry, that is the whole point to plug the game. But that is the theme, right, of LDB. Yeah.
I think there was one more question, and then maybe okay, two more. Let's go with the gentleman in the white shirt first, because he was, and then.
Thank you. I'm really glad that Anna actually brought up complexity theory. It dovetails nicely with my question. But we talked a lot about land use choices in urban environments. So one thing that we think about increasingly is the risk of green gentrification, the spatial constraints of cities, the increasing difficulty of just making cities bigger to accommodate in-migration. We've seen the latest figures on immigration to the United Kingdom. Those people are not moving to the countryside, they're moving to places like London. Given all those challenges and the fact that this is going to, as you open this discussion by talking about the 60% in 2050 or whatever, is there space in this discussion for thinking more of cities as places that slingshot people back into rurality? And is there a concept of rurality that makes sense for the future, rather than just a place where people come from to seek some vague notion of prosperity in the cities? Because that seems like itself an unsustainable and linear way to think about the problem. And not to knock what SUGi is doing. I was a tree planter for 2 years, but those are choices that we make with a very limited resource, which is the space that we have in cities. Is do we build public housing, or do we, plant forests and parks and so on? And these are contentious ideas because of the question underneath it, which is where are we going to fit and accommodate all these people? I live in Archway, which is quite far from here. It's hard for me, even as a resident, to think of myself really as somehow tied to the center of London. But nominally, I live inside of this amorphous thing that is ringed by the M25, which is a complex system which has certain attitudes towards risk and investment and so on. So please.
Great, thank you.
Oh, you want me to pick it up? Sorry, I dropped the idea of complex system. So So this whole dynamic between rural and urban is how I came into this issue, the sustainability issue, right? Since my background is on land use change, and people are migrating out of rural areas because that's part of the social development process that countries go through, right? And if we think about the amount of land that we will need for restoration globally, and then for biodiversity, habitat conservation, and then like all the claims, and also sustainable development goals, all the claims that we have on land, actually there's not, the numbers don't quite square up in my head, and all the trends push us to urban forms. But urban forms has benefits, but it also has all the drawbacks. And I don't think, almost like I think what I'm trying to say is I don't know, but the thing that we will have to do is be more integrated. So the urban and the rural, where they intersect, may have to be more integrated. We have to be using, like the whole movement about vertical farming and growing food in cities. Cities will have to deliver other values other than just human aggregation. But human aggregation does bring a lot of stuff, right? Because it brings innovation, ideas, network, knowledge, that if you lived far away, like 10 kilometers from each other, it's much harder, although you do that by Zoom. But human connection has a different level, virtually and in person. I do think it's a concept that's definitely worth exploring, because we won't be able to, if you look at all the projections, cities won't have the capacity, it won't have the carrying capacity, right? And then what you're going to see is almost like this degrading quality of life, especially in the least developed countries, because that's where the youth bulge is going to happen, like in Southeast Asia and in Africa. And so it's just like, we grew up in an era where we kind of imagined that things are getting better, and we're maybe going into an era that things may get worse for the next generation that are born, especially if you're from an emerging economy, especially from the least developed countries. So how we think about the rural-urban dynamic needs to almost like, this is why I talk about governance, because the governance cannot be siloed, right? Because these things have cascading effect and impact. Anyways, that's a really, really long way of saying I agree with you. And I don't think we have asked that question.
Great. And I think we just maybe should go to our final question, and which actually comes from the organizers of our India Pavilion this year at the Biennale. Yeah.
I'll be very quick, actually. Thank you so much. It has been a very intriguing sort of session and very enlightening. What my question to you is, which is something which we found out while we were working on shipping our pavilion here to UK, that a lot of shipping companies have started using carbon offsetting as one of their principles. What is your opinion about it? Do you think it complements the works you're all doing, or it is something completely contrary to what your works are sort of putting into building regenerative future?
Do you want to go first?
Oh, yeah.
Well, okay, I'll go. I mean, there's definitely a place for offsets, but it needs to be in the right hierarchy. Everything has to be upstream, really sort of work through, and then there's this residual piece, which is part of the offset, and then in that, I mean, it's just got to be far more robust in the kind of advice that's being given, and actually, I think within the firm that I'm in, it was this piece of tail that we weren't really, focusing. And actually, there's a colleague in the fourth row up there, Lily, who was part of our community of practice on this topic, because it was felt that we were not robust enough in the advice that was being given. And now there's a community of practice of about sort of 30 practitioners. That's, to be fair, it's a bit sort of UK and Europe focused at the moment, but we want to expand that more internationally, so as the right advice can be given. And I'm all much for for that offset to be closer to the place where the impact is occurring.
Yeah, that is a little bit. It sometimes is that same thing as like, take a plane, you can offset, buy a T-shirt, you plant a tree, but that is a little bit the premise why we built SUGi, is like, where is that tree planted? Where is that offset really going? And so that tangibility, that robustness, there's a lot of framework that needs to be made. There's still holes to be filled.
I agree with Sean about like we have to maximize our mitigation opportunities because otherwise it becomes like a get out of jail card. Like, oh, I don't have to do anything. I just plant some trees in the Amazon and never saw it. And I think that's what we're seeing today. So I fundamentally I don't think we have a problem with offset because like technically at some point the world will need to offset, but starting with offset is like probably the wrong way. And yeah, it is about quality and integrity of,
Great. Well, I think on that note, maybe the two takeaways from this talk, from this very really inspiring talk for me, and I hope for you also, is that maybe cities are, of course, as we said earlier, they're the source of a lot of our problems, but maybe as urban habitats, they're also where we can generate new ways of resolving, maybe not solving, because that's possibly problematic to use as a term, but resolving or negotiating the issues that we need to negotiate in working towards a more regenerative future. And maybe the other one is, Anna, you mentioned earlier that 15-minute city is not a new idea. I think we can say that there actually are not that many new ideas. Our problem now is not a lack of ideas. It's not a lack of good intentions. It's not a lack of money, actually, even. What it is, what we're lacking is the doing. And to Elise's point, we can talk till we drop, but in the end, what is great about this talk for me was to hear about all the people who are doing things. And so maybe on that final note, we'd like to thank all of you as we stop talking up here, and we'd like to invite you to invite us as we do some drinks after this. So thanks again, and thanks to all the speakers and the Biennale.